Tonight we're going to talk about probably one of the most talked about amendments, especially when we look at recent politics, and that's the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment reads, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." We can look at politics and see how important this amendment is currently, because you can watch any debate, you can watch any news, you can open up any paper, and you're going to hear gun rights or gun control in one way, shape, or form. And it all is focusing in on the Second Amendment. But I want to look first at the reason our founding fathers, specifically James Madison, wanted the Second Amendment written. So for that, we look at what Nelson Lund and Adam Linger wrote in Common Interpretation of the Second Amendment at constitutionalcenter.org, in which they wrote, "Founding fathers believed governments were prone to use soldiers to oppress the people." So the soldiers, being the government, were oppressing the people. And that happened within the revolution prior to the revolution as well. In fact, we look at what David Kopel in the American Revolution Against British Gun Control said. He said that British General Gage was conducting warrantless searches for ammunition and arms. So he was going from place to place, confiscating arms and ammunitions from people prior to the revolution. And this is important because what he was really doing was looking back at the previous one, where oppress the people. He was taking away their ability to fight. So if you want to put your will on somebody, you have a bigger weapon. So if you took away their gun and you have a gun, now you can impress your will on them. And that's why it was so important for them in the Constitution. Now we look forward into the 20th century, and we look at what Robert E. Childs said in The Ideological Origins of the Second Amendment. And this is where we get a little bit of the confusion or argument within the Second Amendment. He looks at the different aspects of the Second Amendment. In fact, pro-gun control people are going to look at the first part of the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. So in the 20th century, we look at the militia, and in terminology now, we call it the National Guard. So the argument for the gun control people are like, the right is going to the National Guard. They're the ones that should have the guns, not any random person. Where pro-gun rights people say, well, no, that they didn't know that a National Guard was going to be built. The militia was it, and the militia was the people. And it later says the people have the right of the people to keep and bear arms, and the militia was the people, and the people are the militia, so that everybody truly has the right to bear arms. Add in the fact that technology itself is going to add a lot of confusion. Back during the Revolution, when this amendment was written, there wasn't a whole lot of varieties of guns. You had a single-shot musket, one shot, not the most accurate. Fast forward to the 20th century, you can't go into a sports store without seeing 65 to 70 different varieties of weapons, something that will carry multiple shots, multiple bullets. So the amount of firepower between the Revolution times and the 20th century is an argument in itself. The founding fathers really, they had no idea what the weapons would be now. For that, we kind of look at some of the litigation, some of the court cases that involve the Second Amendment. There's a lot of them at law.cornell.edu. The first one I read was the United States versus Miller in 1939, and this came from a sawed-off shotgun. Miller had a shotgun. He went to another state. He was ultimately arrested, and that sawed-off shotgun was considered, it wasn't infringing on his rights according to the Second Amendment. They cited saying that there's really no legal way for somebody to use a sawed-off shotgun, and that's kind of the premise of how that was set up. Later in 2008, the District of Columbia versus Heller, the court deemed that the DC handgun was a violation of Heller's Second Amendment rights, and that she could have a gun within it. That effectively ended a 32-year ban on handguns in the District of Columbia. Later, it did cite that Miller's sawed-off shotgun still wasn't okay, and that his was the exception. That having a sawed-off gun, again, it has no legal use. There's no reason anybody would have it. Later, there were several other different court cases, but ultimately, according to this law website, the law since Heller, the courts were willing to uphold certain things. One of them was in the U.S. versus Dorson, where it upheld the defendant's conviction for bringing a handgun into a post office. Thereby, you can't have a gun on government property. Another one was the Juvenile Delinquency Act in U.S. versus Renee, where the juvenile possession of a handgun was the holding of it was not letting them have it did not violate the Second Amendment. And then again in 2012, Koslowski versus the County of Westchester, holding that the New York law preventing individuals from obtaining a license possesses a concealed firearm in public for general purpose unless the individual showed cause did not violate it. So it upheld the New York law where you can't have a concealed permit, that you had, specifically that it prevented individuals from getting that concealed type permit. So we can see how important the Second Amendment was to our founding fathers, and we can see how it's going to continue to be a debate for the very near future because of the way that the strength of the Second Amendment and the strength of the players on both sides of the Second Amendment, whether you're pro-gun or pro-gun control, almost everybody has an opinion, and the Second Amendment will ultimately stay relevant. Thank you.